So let's understand the box model in CSS. Right now we have this div container that has a height and a width of 100 pixels and a background color of red. To really understand the box model, it makes sense to right-click our website and press on Inspect and go into the developer tools. And once you see the element tab right here and scroll down a little bit, you can see the box model. So if we open our body now and go to the div and select our div element, you can see that the div has a height and a width of 100 pixels. So let's inspect the div inside of the box model. And as you can see, inside of the box model, you can see that we have 100x100 right here. So this is basically the width times the height. And in terms of the box model, the thing you see inside of here is basically the content. Right next to the content, we have the padding. Next to the padding, we have a border. And next to the border, we have the margin. And this is something you can really visualize by using the properties padding, border, and margin. So let's imagine we want to add a border to our content. So we can do so by using border. Then we can define the thickness of the border for the first parameter. So we can, for example, say that the thickness of our border is 10 pixels. There are different types of borders. We can, for example, say that we want to use a solid border, which is just a normal line. And we want to have a color of black, for example. And as you can see, we now have a border with a thickness of 10 pixels that is solid. And as you can see, if we take a look at our box model, we now have a content of 10 with padding of 0 and we have a border of 10 pixels. So if you want to add some space between the border and the content, you can use padding, as you can see right here. So we can use padding of 10 pixels, for example. And you don't really need to understand padding right now, but just remember that you can use the padding property to add some padding to our content. So now we have our content. As you can see, it visualizes once I hover over the content area of 100 times 100. Now we have a padding of 10, which is also visualized if you take a look at the box. And now we have a border of 10. So if we add more padding, for example, by adding 100, you'll see the difference pretty clearly. Now we have a super big amount of padding, we have some content inside, and we have a border. But now let's get back to padding of 10, for example. So if you want to add some space outside of the border, to the left and the right, for example, you usually use the margin. So let's use a margin of 20 pixels, for example. And as you can see, our container is now further apart from the top and the left because we added some margin around our content, for example. And this would make a lot of sense, for example, if you think about us having, for example, 3 divs, and now we have some spacing between our boxes. If we would remove the margin, you can see that the space is also removed because there's no margin around our boxes. Now, one thing you probably realize is that we add some more padding, like 40 pixels, for example, our boxes get a lot bigger. This basically means that once we have a content and we add some padding, that padding is added to the content. But oftentimes you probably want to define a width and a height, and then you don't want these boxes to get any bigger. And in order to do so, you can use the box sizing property, and the default value is content box, which just means you have a box around the content and padding and border is added on top of the content. So the box basically goes around the content. And the alternative is border box, which basically means width and height define the width and the height of the border box. So everything that goes up to the border. So if we just save this, you can see that our boxes are getting a lot smaller right now because width and height now defines the width and the height of everything up to our border. So everything up to this point. So padding, border, and content are all part of our box model. And the reason this is called the box model is because you can literally think about it in terms of boxes. You have a box, and inside of this box you have the content. After the content you have the padding, after the padding you have the border, and after the border you have the margin. And a lot of people use padding and margin to generate space around something. If you think about a paragraph, for example, with some text, and now we add some padding to this text, for example, of 100 pixels, you can see that this doesn't really make a difference if we use margin instead of padding. But if you think about the box model, it obviously makes a difference, and there is a difference between using margin and padding. Even though when using padding and margin with the paragraph, for example, you oftentimes can't really tell the difference. But it's really important to keep that in mind because oftentimes you really need to understand the difference between margin and padding. And this is all you need to know to understand the box model in CSS.